In today's story, we're talking about a television show, but this wasn't just any show. This was something entirely different, a program so terrifying, so disturbing, that it caused chaos and disasters you'd never expect. A show so controversial, it was banned and completely taken off the air. What was this show? What kind of horrors did it unleash on the world? That's exactly what we're going to uncover in today's chilling story. Our story begins in the year 1992 in the United Kingdom. It was during this time that a new television program was announced. Its title, Ghost Watch. From the start, it was described as something terrifying, a horror-themed show centered around ghost hunting, spirits, and supernatural phenomena. But what made it stand out and spark excitement among the public was one unique element. Everything was going to be broadcast live. Yes, you heard that right. They were going to hunt ghosts live on television. Real-time terror, unscripted fear. The whole thing sounded like a groundbreaking event. So naturally, the producers chose the most haunting day of the year to air the premiere, Halloween, October 31st, 1992. The time, 9:25 p.m. An odd, specific time. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get into. The show was set to air on BBC One, a well-known, reputable British TV channel. So this wasn't some obscure project. This was big, huge, in fact. People were hyped, and although the creators had planned to air multiple episodes, only one was ever shown. That single episode turned out to be the last. Now, back to the time, 9:25 p.m. That wasn't a random choice. Think about it. Most TV shows and movies air at rounded times. 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock. You never really see a show advertised at 9:25 p.m. or 8:13 p.m., right? That's intentional. It programs viewers to tune in at specific, familiar intervals. So why did they pick such a strange time? Because they didn't want everyone watching the very beginning. Yes, they did that on purpose. They knew most viewers would tune in a little later, maybe a few minutes past 9, maybe closer to 9:30, and the show opened with a very important message, a disclaimer that everything in the episode was fiction, just acting. But since the producers expected most viewers to miss that disclaimer, those people would jump right into the middle of what looked like a real live ghost hunt. No context, no warning, just raw fear. They'd see the hosts, the panic, the haunted house, the ghostly figures, and they'd believe it. That was exactly the reaction the creators were hoping for. Full immersion, full belief. So, the show begins. On screen, we see several hosts, well-known BBC presenters, and a professional psychologist who was brought on to analyze the reactions and experiences of those involved. They had all gathered in a creepy, dilapidated house known as Foxhill Drive, which they claimed was haunted by malevolent spirits. Everything was being shown as if it were live. You saw the eerie house, dimly lit, with creaking floors and strange noises echoing in the background. Viewers at home were glued to their screens, watching what they thought was an actual live investigation of a haunted house. The psychologist began interpreting certain scenes, saying things like, "What you just saw, that could be the result of a tormented angry spirit," and offering professional-sounding explanations to back up the supernatural activity. And remember, since so many people tuned in late, they had no idea it was all scripted. A massive portion of the audience missed the part where the BBC clearly stated, "This is fiction." What they saw, looked, and sounded all too real. The show had segments where the hosts interviewed people in the neighborhood, people who shared terrifying stories about paranormal encounters. Of course, these were actors, and every scene was pre-recorded, but again, the audience didn't know that. One major storyline focused on an old abandoned house that was said to be haunted by a terrifying spirit named Pipes. Now, Pipes wasn't real. The name itself was completely made up by the show's creators, but viewers believed it. Pipes became the face of the haunting. They showed blurry footage of Pipes in the background, wearing a creepy mask, standing motionless in the shadows. It was subtle, but chilling. The idea was that the house wasn't just haunted, it was under the control of a demonic force, and his name was Pipes. The audience was hooked. Then, the producers did something wild. They displayed a phone number on the screen. Viewers were invited to call in and share their own ghost stories, or to comment on what they were seeing on the show. The lines were open to anyone who had experienced supernatural events or simply wanted to weigh in on the night's events. And what happened next was pure chaos. The phone lines were overwhelmed. People weren't just curious, they were terrified. The show had sparked mass panic. Viewers thought they were watching something real, and with the invitation to call in, millions of people tried to get through. That's right, over 1 million call attempts were made to that number. It crashed the entire system. People weren't calling to chat, they were scared out of their minds. Some wanted to know if what they saw was real. Others believed the show had awakened dark spirits in their own homes. And some people, genuinely convinced that something evil had been unleashed, called in desperate for help. This wasn't just a Halloween scare anymore. This was hysteria. And as for the show itself, it had tens of millions of viewers. The hype around Ghostwatch had been building for weeks. It was promoted everywhere. People couldn't wait to watch it. The creators had masterfully marketed it as something unlike anything seen before, and they weren't wrong. It was unforgettable, just not in the way they expected. The aftermath, disastrous. Some people reportedly suffered from psychological trauma. Parents complained their children were having nightmares. One family even blamed the show for their young son's breakdown. The backlash was immediate and explosive. BBC was flooded with complaints. Experts debated whether it was ethical to blur the line between fiction and reality so convincingly. And so, Ghostwatch was banned. That first episode, it was the last. The show was never aired again on British television. BBC pulled it entirely. They never attempted another episode. Ghostwatch became a ghost itself, whispered about, remembered by those who experienced it live, and passed down as a story too strange to believe, but too real to forget. So there you have it, a television program that crossed a line so thin it left a nation in fear. A fake show that felt more real than reality. A Halloween night that Britain will never forget. And if you're brave enough, maybe look up Ghostwatch yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you. The moment viewers of the show started calling that number, of course the call didn't go directly to the host. No, it didn't reach the presenter right away. At first, it was the production team that answered. They were the ones who took the calls initially, and then, in turn, transferred those calls to the presenter. Now, most of the people who were calling in, they were dead serious. They were believers. They genuinely thought everything happening was real. They called in, terrified, saying they were scared and confused. Things started getting chaotic, like a real panic was spreading. So, what happened next? The production team, the ones answering the calls, had to step in and clarify. They said, "Hey folks, listen up. This is just a show. It's all fake. We mentioned right at the beginning that this is just a reenactment, pure acting." But that was just the beginning. That was their first attempt to calm people down by reminding them it was all scripted. But as time passed, the phone calls didn't stop. On the contrary, they kept increasing, more and more, until eventually they hit 1 million calls. That's when the team said, "This is impossible. There's no way we can answer all of them. Absolutely no way." So they made a decision. Cut the line completely. Shut it down. From that moment on, no matter how many people tried to call, the phone wouldn't ring. It was like the number didn't exist anymore. Silence. Nothing. But for the people still trying to call the number, even after it was disconnected, what did they hear? They'd get dead silence. Maybe some faint static, like soft crackling or background noise. And that was enough to send people over the edge. You see, it was mostly the ones who still believed the show was real. They thought everything they'd seen on screen was actually happening. So when they dialed and heard that eerie noise, they panicked. They said, "That's it. That's Pipes. The ghost doesn't want us calling the show. He's here. He followed us. Pipes is in our house." They believed the curse or the haunting or the ghost itself had left the show and entered their real lives. The terror spread. The chaos was real. Most people couldn't even finish watching the episode. They got to the part where the ghost stuff really started hitting hard, and that was it. They switched off the TV, changed the channel. They wanted out. They were like, "No way we're watching a show that's bringing ghosts into our homes. May God protect us." They just couldn't go on. Then, right at the very end of the episode, literally the final minutes, the hosts came back on and explained everything again. They said it clearly. Everything you've seen in this program was fictional. It was all just acting. But the question is, who actually heard that part? Very few. Only a small number of viewers made it to that moment. The majority had already bailed. Ghosts? Spirits? What kind of nonsense is this? They said. Why are we even watching this? Many viewers had never seen the beginning of the episode, so they had no idea it was fake, and many others didn't make it to the end. They were too scared and had already turned it off. So, those people? They were left convinced that everything was real. And Can you imagine? Even after the show had ended, after it was all over, people were still trying to call that number. The world had gone mad with calls. So what did BBC One do? They made an announcement. They came out publicly and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the program you just watched, it was all staged, every part of it. It was fiction." And right after that, they aired a completely unrelated show, something light, like a kids' adventure reality show, let's say Wild Safari, or something similar, just a total change of tone. But then a new problem appeared. The numbers they showed on this next program, people were calling them too, but not to talk about Wild Safari. They were still asking questions about Ghostwatch. They were confused. They thought they were still interacting with the horror show. And so BBC One had to go back again and say, "Please, people, understand. For the love of everything holy, this was all a fictional performance." But it was like no one was listening. The fear had already taken hold. They terrified the public. Hearts were racing. People were losing their minds. Pants were, well, let's just say some people had accidents from the sheer fear. And speaking of accidents, let me tell you about one in particular. You're not going to believe this. A woman actually contacted BBC One. She said, "Because of your program, because of what you just aired, my husband has a problem now." The man, from sheer terror, had lost control of his bodily functions. God bless him, the poor guy was so frightened he couldn't hold anything in. He lost control. Right there, walking around. A full-on accident. She was furious. "You people ruined him. He can't even go about his day anymore without fear. You broke him." That show didn't just scare people. It traumatized them. And it didn't end there. Among the affected, pregnant women. Yes, pregnant women were watching this show about ghosts and demons and poltergeists. For real. Why would you, being pregnant, watch something like that? Out of the ones who watched, three actually went into labor. That's how terrified they were. They didn't just get scared. They went into active labor. Baby on the way. No, baby summoned by a ghost. God help us. And then there's the kid. One more terrifying case. A child, watching the program with his parents. They were all gathered, watching together, but they didn't finish it. Too scary. Switched it off. Too much. The kid didn't know it was fake. No one told him. After that day, he couldn't sleep alone in his room. Every night he'd look over his shoulder. "Where's Pipes? Pipes is coming." The ghost haunted his imagination. He was convinced the spirit could appear from anywhere. Above, below, the closet, under the bed, anywhere. The poor kid went into full panic mode. From that night on, he could only sleep in his parents' room. Even then, with both parents beside him, he insisted the lights stay on. He couldn't handle the dark. The entire family suffered, and it didn't stop there. The boy refused to go to school. Absolutely refused. He was terrified Pipes would show up in the hallway, the bathroom, even the classroom. He believed Pipes would come for him when he was alone. The fear never left him. And then there's one more story. All the people I mentioned before, they were scared, sure, but this guy, he was on another level. He was a whole separate case. His name was Martin Denham, 18 years old. He was also one of the viewers of the program, watched the whole thing, and he was absolutely destroyed by it. At 18, Martin worked in a factory, but Martin had learning difficulties. Though he was 18, his cognitive ability was closer to a 13-year-old. He didn't understand things the way others did. He couldn't distinguish fiction from reality easily. So when he saw what he saw on Ghostwatch, he didn't think it was entertainment. To him, it was all real. And what happened to Martin? Well, that's another chapter entirely. It was a normal March day. Martin was sitting with his stepfather, not his father, his stepfather, watching TV. They were flipping through channels when a certain show caught their attention. Martin sat there, eyes glued to the screen, completely fixated. His stepfather recalls looking over at him and seeing Martin completely dazed, like he wasn't even in the room anymore. His eyes wide open, frozen, as if he'd been hypnotized. The man was gone, not physically but mentally, trapped in another world entirely. He just kept watching, his face blank, unblinking. The stepfather even described Martin's state as something close to being under hypnosis. That's how deep he was into whatever this show was. And then, after watching a big chunk of it, they changed the channel. Nothing dramatic, just a casual switch. But something in Martin shifted. Quietly, without saying a single word, he stood up and walked to his room. His body moved, but his mind, who knows where it was? He went into sleep. But the moment he entered his room, he realized something was wrong. He couldn't sleep at all. He laid in bed, eyes wide open. Tried again. Still couldn't sleep. So he got up, turned the lights on, and tried sleeping with the lights on, something he had never done before. He was tossing and turning, lights on, stuck in his bed, not able to close his eyes. Then, as he lay there frozen, the fear creeping deeper and deeper into his bones, he started hearing noises. Yes, Martin began hearing sounds. Strange, low noises echoing through the room. He was terrified. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. I've never seen someone get so scared that their legs just stop working, completely paralyzed by fear, lying flat on their back. And Martin, poor guy, in that exact moment said to himself, "That's it. The jinn are here. They've come for me." But let's talk about that sound for a moment. The sound he heard, it was coming from the central AC or maybe the central heating system. You know how those big machines sometimes make that weird mechanical gear-shifting noise? That's what it sounded like. He heard that mechanical growl, like it kicked into second gear, and that was it. Full panic. Martin bolted from his room. No hesitation. Took his whole body and ran to where his mom and stepdad were. He decided he was going to sleep there with them. But even then, even next to his family, even in that safe space, he still couldn't sleep. What exactly happened to him that night? He never told anyone. We don't know. But what we do know is what happened 5 days later. 5 days after Martin watched that show, he was found, hanging. He had taken a water hose, climbed a tree, and tied one end of the hose around a high branch. The other end, he wrapped it tightly around his neck. And then he jumped. Martin ended his life. The people in the neighborhood found him swinging, lifeless. And the tree he chose? It wasn't just any tree. That tree already had a name. It was known as the Witch's Tree. Locals believed it was cursed, haunted, a place of dark energy. And now it had claimed another soul. When they brought Martin's body down from the tree, they found something in his pocket. A note, a letter to his mom. In it, Martin wrote, "Mom, don't be afraid. If there are ghosts, I'll become one. I'll be with you. I'll stay by your side." Imagine that. He was so consumed by fear, by whatever world that show dragged him into, that he believed he'd become a ghost, just like the ones in the show, and stay with his mom. That was his way of comforting her. That was his goodbye. After Martin's death, his mother and stepfather didn't stay silent. They came forward and blamed the program, loudly, publicly. They held the show responsible for what happened to Martin. They wanted justice. They wanted everyone involved in that program, from the writers to the producers, to be held accountable. They demanded that people finally acknowledge the damage this show had caused. It drove their son to suicide. And worse, this wasn't an isolated case. They said it was causing chaos, confusion, fear, and who knows what else. They filed an official complaint. Things got noisy. There was a public uproar. And what did the authorities do? They decided to permanently shut the show down. Only one episode had ever aired. Just one. And that was it. The show was never broadcast again. Not a single rerun, not a single follow-up episode. But here's the twist. Nobody got arrested. Nobody got punished. No one was held legally responsible. Yet even after the show was banned, bootleg copies started showing up on DVDs. Some people had recorded that one and only episode, and now they were selling it, spreading it around. It was becoming something of a cult hit despite the tragedy. It also started appearing on a few sketchy websites, streaming here, sharing there, but nowadays, no one really cares anymore. The hype faded. People stopped searching for it. As they say, it caused a storm back then, but now it's gone quiet. Why? Because most people eventually realized the whole thing was fake. All of it. Just acting. Just effects. From the very beginning, it had all been a performance. And if people had known that from the start, if they'd known it was all lies, no one would have freaked out. No one would have believed it. No one would have watched. But the creators knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't say it was fake up front. In fact, they waited. They strategically aired it at 9:25 p.m., a time when they figured not many people would be tuning in. And when they did add a disclaimer, they slipped it in quickly, vaguely, probably thinking that very few people would notice it. That way, they could still say, "Oh, we warned people. We said it was fake." Smart, right? They played with people's minds, made them think it was a live broadcast. That's what made it scary. That's what made it feel real. People believed what they saw. And the creators, they got exactly what they wanted. Fear, drama, and massive attention. But here's the big question. Do you believe a horror show could actually push someone to suicide, like what happened with Martin? Or do you think Martin was already struggling? Like I mentioned, he was 18, but mentally, he was more like 13. Was it his fragile mind that played the bigger role, or was it the horror itself that dragged him over the edge? Another question: do you think the creators intentionally aired it at that late time just so they could later claim, "We told you it was fake," knowing most people wouldn't notice that disclaimer? Did they set the trap on purpose, hoping that by the time people caught on, the damage was already done? Did they want people to believe it was all real? Let me know what you think in the comments. And that's it. That's today's story. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure you do. And hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people. Alright, see you in the next one. Peace.